Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider. Joined as always my co-host Nick Filato. Today's podcast is going to be a little bit shorter. We're going to put a bow and a wrap on the Brian Daboll, Wink Martindale saga and how it came to an end finally for the New York Giants as they look to move forward and what we can take away from it and our feelings now, I guess, on Brian Daboll and him as a head coach, given what we know. And some things that we'll be talking about on today's episode will be the article in The Athletic from Dan Duggan, kind of outlining some stuff from personal team sources that, got interesting there. And just in general, how this thing ended with the Giants and Wink Martindale parting ways mutually, but also in that sense, allowing Wink Martindale to potentially coordinate something like the Eagles defense next year, if that happens, or, something of that nature. So Nick, what jumps out to you about how this thing wrapped up and anything you've learned in the last 48, 72 hours?
In the last 48 or 72 hours, I think this is a brilliant article that people should go read if you have The Athletic. Great job by Dan Duggan. So I want to tip my cap there. I would say that this was an issue that happened early on. It was evident, I think, to people on the coaching staff back in 2022, and it just boiled over at this point. That's at least what it seems. It seems like there was some pettiness from Wink Martindale. Absolutely. He didn't appreciate how Brian Daboll ran his ship because Brian Daboll gets in your ass a little bit. Brian Daboll likes to yell a little bit. Brian Daboll, maybe it gets annoying on game day, but that's just not Wink Martindale's vibe. But these are two hyper competitive individuals. And I just think it wasn't a match that was supposed to happen because that's who Brian Daboll is. What it means going forward, though, for Brian Daboll, again, man, and we brought this up on the last podcast we did on this situation, is you got to nail this defensive coordinator hire. You have to nail this defensive coordinator hire because some of those defensive players who love to wink might not look at you as fondly, especially when, you do yell as much as you do on game day. You are as furious as you are on game day. And I think if this defense struggles, whoever they hire, this locker room could become fractured. And that's a big problem that Brian Daboll needs to get ahead of.
It does, because we don't want to, like, this is something interesting that Kurt brought up to me, one of our listeners, Nick, about how, this has been a problem and an issue bubbling over for Wink Martindale and Brian Daboll for a while now. And he brought up how, like, we discuss culture a lot and how much, like, wins down the stretch might help your culture in the next season. But one thing that we never really look at is the flip side of the coin, which is, like, how winning can sometimes hide bad culture. Because obviously the culture between the Giants coaches, specifically Wink and Daboll last year, was not good. And the winning hit it. Now they lost this year and it all came out because the winning is no longer there. And that's when things like this come to the surface.
I think this is an excellent quote from one of Duggan's sources, speaking on Wink Martindale. His personality kind of fits his style of defense. Blitz zero man coverage. He's not a loose cannon. He's very calculated, but he just doesn't give a shit. And I think he used the media to his advantage with a lot of the quotes that he put out there to these anonymous sources, or whether it was the Wilkins brothers, to somewhat undermine Brian Daboll because he did not like Brian Daboll's style of leading. He did not like how emotional Brian Daboll gets, because you see Wink. When have you ever seen Wink Martindale show any emotion on the sideline? You just don't, right?
He said he made it a point this year. He told us that he does that on purpose. He's calm and collect. By the way, I'm just gonna be honest with you, Nick. I think Wink's done a lot of stuff here that's probably wrong, and he could be viewed in the wrong. But to me, that's 100% the right way to coach. I think when you have control over your emotions, you're a better person, you're a better coach, you're a better human being. You're better in every way. I have struggled a lot in my life to have control over my emotions, and something I've tried to improve. I've made some I've made some tangible improvements as I've aged, dude. But, like, there's still a long way to go there, even for me, in a lot of regards. But having control over your emotions is a good thing. It's not like, to me, it's not like one style, one's the other style. I think if Daboll, like, some of the things we'll get into in this article, Nick, and talk about, are not a good look for Brian Daboll, and they're also just they're not good overall, regardless of the aesthetic. Yeah.
No, not at all. And it's not even just Wink Martindale, who I believe the source is, right? Like, Duggan is talking to somebody who's in that building. We just don't know who. And that somebody, the way these quotes can be read, it definitely seems like it's an accepted thing among a lot of people in the Giants organization that Brian Daboll is a bit irrational with his emotions, and it's affecting the game day operations. And that's where the problem lies.
Yeah, one of a few great quotes from this from the team source. I'm not going to give them all away because I don't want to rip Duggan like that, but we'll talk about some of them. Is he said you could probably the team source said you could probably see it building a bit. Like the defense is getting installed. You might have 12 guys on the field for 1 second, and Dave's is just losing it, and he's calling out coaches, and he's making it personal. That's the thing. It's like he's yelling into the headsets. He's making it personal. He's constantly screaming. It just doesn't feel like the best way to go about getting your point across, right? Like.
No, of course not. Absolutely not. And that's just not how Wink Martindale operates. That's not how John Harbaugh operated with the Baltimore Ravens either, right? So he came into this situation, and there was a quote in the article. And again, I don't want to rip off the article by Duggan, but it was something to the effect that Wink Martindale, I think, addressed the media. And this was last season in 2022. And he said something about controlling your emotions, not referencing Daboll at all. But he was like, I owe it to my players to be composed. And that was a veiled shot at the time at Brian Daboll. And we didn't read it into that because we had no idea there was any tension between Daboll and Wink Martindale. But now looking back after we've seen everything unfold, that was 100% a veiled shot at Brian Daboll, somebody who couldn't really control his emotions. And I also think it was very interesting that, again, not trying to rip off, I won't read the quotes, but Duggan spoke in his article about how the tension was significantly raised during the Detroit Lions game in preseason, the first preseason game. It wasn't even just the Dallas Cowboys 40-0 blowout. It happened in the Detroit Lions game because there was, I think, like 12 men on the field. There were a couple operational errors in the article, and it said this, guys who aren't even going to make the team, and Daboll lost his mind on the coaching staff. And at some point, with Wink Martindale's cover zero type of personality, it's just not going to fly. It just was a match that just was not going to work out.
Yeah, exactly right, Nick. And you could see, like, it's not like we're trusting only the team source on this, Nick, in the sense that, like, oh, the team source is saying that Brian Daboll doesn't have full control over his emotions. We've seen it with our own eyes. Like, you see it when Brian Daboll goes to the sideline, when Daniel Jones comes to the sideline. I think it was after that pick 6 he threw against Seattle, and Daboll shows him the iPad, like, look at what you missed, or look at what you're processing, and he chucks the iPad. And it's like, even that, like, people can look at that, and it's like, that's a great example right there of someone not controlling their emotions, because that's not the best way to get across to Jones your frustrations with him at the time.
How many times have Daboll referenced that? He's referenced how one of the things he admires most about Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones's composure. And he's like, I should take lessons from he said that back in 2022, he was saying shit like that.
Right. And that's, but this, this hits close to home, Nick, because as somebody who has these issues at times, you always in the moment have that quick reaction blow up. And then after it, you can process that you were wrong. You can process that you don't want that to happen again. And you can process that it's not a good look for you. But it's like
becoming cathartic for you, buddy.
Yeah, in a sense it has, right? And it's like Daboll's probably the same way. It's like afterwards, he's like, shit, that wasn't the right way to go about this. And I said to myself last time, but then like naturally in the moment, something takes over when you don't have good control over your emotions. And that's maybe something that he could look into himself on, Nick, like, as a coach. Like, it's a little bit different for me when I'm like losing my control at a poker table over a bad beat for a quick second, and that doesn't really matter in real life thing. But it's a little different when you're the coach of a football team, one of 32, and you're being paid millions of dollars to do your job the right way. And you know that by losing control of your emotions, you're not doing your job the right way.
And I want to make this clear. Dan and I, we're not excusing Wink Martindale at all. Like, no. I think Wink Martindale is, if you want to assign blame to one, I think it was a match that wasn't supposed to happen, like I said, but Wink Martindale definitely did not handle this well. And there was a lot of pettiness with how he used the media. I think it can easily be perceived that way, but we have to live in reality and also think this is a people business. This is a human business. Brian Daboll is the coach of the New York Giants, a team that Dan and I cover, the team that we love. How is this going to affect the New York Giants moving forward if Brian Daboll cannot control his emotions? And this is going to maybe affect other coaches on the staff or prevent some coaches from coming to this staff because they don't want to work with
there, Nick. Like, it's like this shit hits the media, and now every coach in the NFL is reading about it. And then does that impact who we can get? Does that limit the pool of coaches that want to come coach for us, Nick? Because I don't think it's going to affect the players. That's the good part. Like, I think from all accounts, including this article, Brian Daboll does really well by the players. He understands things. He understands players. He understands don't push him too hard now, but push him hard then. And he understands when to push and push their buttons and get the most out of them. That's something I feel like Joe Judge did a horrific job of. I felt that way after 2020 when he had his mini run against those backup quarterbacks. I felt that way throughout, and I never thought it would work because of that. And the players to me are still most important, Nick, because I think ultimately the coaches who he hires do have to work for him. Like technically he's their boss, right? I mean, Shane's their boss too, but Daboll is really their day-to-day boss. If you're a positional coach or assistant coach, and the players, it's a different scenario, but it doesn't feel great about it. It just doesn't rub me the best way when he's losing his emotions a bit with the coaches or trying to take authority of situations he maybe shouldn't be trying to take authority of.
I think that's a good way to look at it, especially when you have a veteran defensive coordinator. But I got to say this too, man. Just, we got to cover this from all sides. This is Brian Daboll's operation.
Yes.
He's the head football coach, man.
Right.
So if he wants to say something on the defense, he should have full authority to say something on the defense and give his input. And I don't know if this was an official team source, if this was Twitter rumors, but I remember through this fiasco, we saw quotes that Wink Martindale did not respect Brian Daboll's ability to comprehend and call a defense and even give his input, and that also rubbed Wink Martindale the wrong way. Now, I don't know if that was true, but if that was true, I mean, look, he's the head coach. He's obviously not a dumb football guy. Brian Daboll has coached how many different positions professionally? Like, this isn't somebody who was just, I'm an offensive line coach and now I'm a head coach. Like, he was a coach of a lot of different positions. He's been around a little bit, right? So I wonder if that was a factual statement or not. But look, man, I'm glad Wink Martindale's gone at this point. And it's not because I have any animus for Wink Martindale at all. It's just I don't want a coach who is trying to use the media to get ahead of his head coach and this weird tension that I have to say, great job by the Giants coaching staff and the people in the building who knew this was going on to prevent the players from catching on. Adoree Jackson was totally taken off guard. Adoree Jackson's a veteran player and he had no idea any of this was going on. That says something, man. That's good for the Giants and their ability to keep it in-house until obviously you saw the Jay Glazer report, which I think it's safe to assume that was either Wink himself or the Wilkins brothers.
Yeah, and Glazer never misses. We said Glazer never misses. Everybody's like, oh, here's his miss. Nope. Glazer never misses. He's right again. So we just have to take everything he says at this point, in my opinion, with as close to a damn fact, because he doesn't report often. Odell Beckham trade. No one thought it was possible than this. But I will say this, Nick, just to make it clear, like, I don't think so. I talked about how Daboll learned under Belichick, and I feel like his coaching style is somewhat similar. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that he has this, wants that authority and wants to be able to have some say over the defense. I just think it wasn't a good fit for Wink Martindale. But if you look across the rest of the NFL, Nick, there are plenty of defensive coordinator, head coach situations where the head coach does have a lot more authority and a lot more say and can get involved in ways that Brian Daboll's trying to get involved. That necessarily wasn't the fit for Martindale because Martindale thought he was coming in and going to have full control. I'm sure like John Harbaugh gave him at times, though even that led to some issues reportedly. Nothing confirmed, but some issues between those two reportedly that led to them parting ways, obviously before the 2022 season. So I don't necessarily think that part is a bad thing. I just think some of the quotes from that article and some of the things that they were reporting, like, Brian Daboll constantly yelling into the headsets and stuff like that and game day, it's like, it just doesn't feel like the best route for like maximizing your team and your coaching.
So I can speak to this personally.
Yeah.
So when I was in college, I was on staff, and a prominent coach on staff loved to yell all the time into the headset. It was infuriating, and every other coach absolutely hated it. It was something that everybody held against this specific coach because it was incessant and it was unnecessary. But the thing that I feel like is a little bit different is, well, I guess it's not, because Daboll does do this as well. Like, he'll get in the player's ass in front of everybody. And that's something that we dealt with as a staff as well. And it drew the morale down significantly. Now, the big difference is these are college kids in the Division III level, and this is the NFL. They're professionals, but we're all freaking humans, right? If you're getting your ass chewed and you don't even think you're fully culpable for the ass chewing, it's going to have an effect on you.
Yeah.
So I hope, man, Brian Daboll tries to work on the anger part of it and just self-control of the emotions. Yeah. That's it. Just a little bit, because I don't want people to not join the New York Giants because they don't want to work for a coach who is that aggressive. especially in the coaching side of things, not talking
Yeah.
about free agents.
Yeah. And I think overall, we have 2 years sample size now, Brian Daboll. It's not as rosy as it was for me going into the rest of, going into the moving forward. Like, I still have full faith that he can mold a quarterback if he ever gets an opportunity to draft a quarterback that's talented. And I mean, really talented. Even if he doesn't, I think he can mold a not so talented quarterback that has a fresh mind, like he did with DeVito to an extent. And I think for a lot of ways, he maximized what DeVito even is possible, capable of doing. But there's other parts of being a coach, and those have to also be on, those have to be on the right trajectory too. And this is not even like the top of my worries list, Nick. The top of my worries list is in-game coaching, which I thought was generally poor overall in 2023. And looking back at 2022, it was good to an extent, but I even remember having some qualms in some of the games in 2022. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say some of the in-game coaching, like I agree with you, but like I look at Joe Shane too, and I'm like, yo, you did not do a great job getting this roster prepared. There were a lot of mistakes by Joe Shane that put Brian Daboll into a position where he might have done something differently if he had maybe another tight end or something that, because Daniel Bellinger, your second year tight end getting hurt shouldn't just collapse your entire game plan against the team. Like that shouldn't be the case when you have 3 tight ends on the roster. I'm sorry.
True. And that's a fair criticism as well. And both of them obviously had a down year after a really good first year, where Daboll won head coach of the year and Shane was in the mix, I think. I don't remember fully, but for GM of the year, but executive of the year. So, it's a little bit different feel going into this offseason from that standpoint, but I thought it was really interesting to hear both sides. I don't think I think you nailed it. Like Wink is not innocent in all this. Everything he did and the way he played the media and then storming out of the meeting when Daboll said he's going to fire, his assistant coaches, like take some culpability, right? Like Brian Daboll's sitting there saying, I'm firing my best friend, one of my good friends, Bobby Johnson, who I think is a good offensive line coach. In his mind, I'm sure Daboll didn't really want to fire him. He probably we had injuries on the offensive line. We had some bad luck on the offensive line. Give him another shot with better luck, and he's going to do the job I think he's capable of. But he did it anyway because he thought, it's better for the team. And Wink Martindale was supposed to take that same kind of responsibility when they told him, look, your outside linebackers are not really performing at the level they're capable of or at the level we drafted them to be capable of. Let's take some responsibility and maybe bring someone in who can get the most out of these guys. And his response is just say F you to Daboll, Wink, and storm out of a meeting, storm out of a building. Like, that's a crazy move too. Like, they're both just massive ego guys going nuts right there.
What's going on, Big Blue Banter listeners? I'm excited for the football season for several reasons. And one of those reasons is PrizePicks, which is North America's largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform. And it's so simple to use. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including professionals, sharks, and people who are going to exploit you, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you just watch the winnings roll in. It's very simple to play and gives you a little extra skin. I've set my picks in less than 60 seconds. There are so many stats to choose from, and the withdrawals of funds are easy and quick. Dan and I will be adding a segment to our show before every game where we pick our favorite stats, more or less, yards or touchdowns, what have you, and we'll be discussing why from a scheme, matchup, and game theory perspective. I love their promotions and how easy their interface is to operate at PrizePicks. I may select more on tackles for a loss from Bobby Okereke or Kayvon Thibodeau next game. They also do other sports as well. It's a really cool experience. Please join Dan and I in the fun of PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. You will not regret it. Make Little Caesars, the official pizza sponsor of the NFL, part of your game day. There are few things better in the world than kicking back, watching some football, and biting into some delicious Little Caesars pizza. Order online during our Pizza pregame, 1 hour before and 3 hours after NFL kickoffs, plus all day on Sunday. And get ready for some football and fun. Choose your favorite Little Caesars pizza or pick the toppings you crave. Old World pepperoni, extra cheese, Italian sausage, olives, onions, pineapple if you're into that. Put it on half the pie, the entire pie. There are so many other options that I don't have time to name. Slap that on a round crust, a thin crust, a stuffed crust, a Detroit-style deep dish. Either way, you win. And speaking of winning, everyone scores with convenient delivery or our in-store pizza portal pickup. So grab some friends and enjoy a few slices during the game. But there was so much that led up to that.
I know, but it's like
Wink
handle it like a grown man.
Wink Martindale knew what was going on at that point, though. He
Yeah.
knew that they got ahead of everything with an 8:30 press conference to put it out
Mhm.
there that they wanted him back. He knew that the firing was basically them poking him with a stick saying, okay, you resign then, because we're not going to fire you because we want to control your destiny, and we want to not
And the
pay
money
you that
was
$3
really the
million.
thing there, yeah.
Exactly. So Wink Martindale knew what was going on, and I don't blame him for being upset, but what I think he deserves some culpability for is just the relationship in general, and maybe not being as easy to work with, really. I think that's probably what his issue was, and maybe that was an issue in Baltimore because they mutually parted ways. It wasn't as messy as this situation, but we'll see what happens with Wink, because now he can pursue wherever he's going. He's just not getting that $3 million that he would have got if the Giants did fire him. So he knew exactly what was going on. It is, man. I just feel like this is crazy because I feel like this is a reality television show. And this is the New York Giants right now. We're a reality television show, and that's why this is exciting, when we should be in the freaking playoffs competing for Super Bowls, but we haven't been for over a decade because we've been a pathetic franchise for how long now? It's crazy.
And once you get into that reality television mode that we're in, it's like that reminds me of the Jets over the last decade and 22 decades of horrible football. And you don't want to be in this reality TV mode. But that's what happens with losing when it comes that way. And the Giants were 6-1 in 2022. They have lost since that 6-1 start. They've lost a lot of football games, even dating back to this glorious 2022. This starting to be somewhat reminiscent of the Joe Judge 2020 to me, where it's just like a little bit of false gold. It was better than that, obviously, but I'm hoping it doesn't go in that direction. This is a big season for the Giants, and they're going to have to get creative here, and they're going to have to hope Carmen Brasillo is going to make a big difference, I think, on this offense, and health is going to make a big difference on the offensive line, because that's the first part. And if they don't have the opportunity to upgrade at quarterback, that's the second part. And I think, they have to look themselves in the mirror in a lot of these self-evaluations. Like, they're going to have, even if they can't get a quarterback in round one, Nick, I think they're going to have to seriously be open to the idea of competitions at multiple positions. Offensive tackle, where they're penciling in Evan Neal prior to this point, and quarterback, where they've penciled in Daniel Jones to this point. I don't care the investment they had in Neal. I don't care the investment from a financial standpoint, the capital standpoint with Neal, and a financial standpoint with Jones. Those guys need competition. There's no guaranteeing the job for these poor performing players at this point. They need to really be open to just like looking at this next year as like, we need to win ASAP, because they need to keep their jobs at this point, Daboll and Shane.
Exactly, man. We're at such a pivotal point as a franchise because these coaching hires are so important. Like Brasillo, that's a huge hire. Whoever they hire as a DC, huge hire.
Yeah.
All in. But you also have faces of your franchise that could be leaving. Saquon Barkley's been the face of this franchise since he was drafted in 2018. Right. Sterling Shepard, now look, he hasn't had a huge impact on the football field, but still, that's a locker room guy who is leaving. Xavier McKinney might not be back. He's going to be leaving. Adoree Jackson, probably not back. So this entire operation is there's a lot of change happening, and I don't know.
And then breaking points, by the way, for what'd you say? You don't know what?
I don't know if it's going to be better. I don't know. Like 2022 could be the peak of Shane and Daboll. That's not a good peak.
That's the thing I'm worried about. Yeah, because that's not a good peak. Beating a shit Ed Donatel defense in Minnesota is not what you need. Like, and then getting crushed by the Eagles in the second round. Like, that's not a peak. Like, we need to start setting the bar a lot higher. The peak needs to be like, we're the Bills, where like we have a bad start to a season, but now all of a sudden we're the 2 seed and we're the third best Super Bowl favorite. That's what you want. You don't want to keep grinding to 9 or 10 wins, in my mind at least. But it's also a pivotal point for like Jones, Neal, and what was I going to say? Jones, Neal, and Waller, 3 major pieces on their offense. Like, this is it. Like, all 3 of those pieces, this is their future with the Giants 2024. Jones, if he doesn't get it done this year, that's it for him. Neal, if he doesn't get it done this year, Nick, there's no way they're going into year 4 giving him any chance. And the same goes for Waller. If it's another injured year for Waller, that's it for him with his Giants career too. So it's just like a really pivotal point for a lot of the core of what's supposed to be the jump from 2022 to 23, right? Like, the Giants went very far in this past offseason. They structured that Daniel Jones contract in a way that's pushing a lot of the cap back to this year and then 2025. They structured the Lawrence contract in a way that pushes a lot of the cap hit back, the Thomas contract in a way that pushes a lot of the cap hit back, because they wanted to bring in Waller and they wanted to bring in Okereke and players that can help them win right now. Well, the winning right now didn't happen in 2023. It has to start in 2024, or else that's it for the core. Like, what's the point of continuing with this core if they're not? If we're just going to keep cycling through these seasons, we're like, you know what? If we just fix this and this and this, it's going to get better. No, at some point you have to just look yourself in the mirror and say, it's not going to get better. This core is not working. Let's try a different thing out. And so I think that this is it for them. Like, this is the end for that the core on offense, at least.
Yeah, and then if you look on the defensive side, you have some true building blocks. Dexter Lawrence, every general manager would sign up for a Dexter Lawrence. He arguably is the most impactful defensive lineman in the league. And you have Aaron Donald in that conversation. You have Chris
He might
Jones
retire, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Like Dexter Lawrence, and he's in his mid-20s. Like, he's an excellent elite player. Bobby Okereke, that's a true middle linebacker who had his best season in Wink Martindale's defense. That has to carry over. Kayvon Thibodeaux, there's tons of potential there. He's still very young. I understand people are soured on him. Look, I watch a lot of tape on Kayvon Thibodeaux. I still remain optimistic about Kayvon Thibodeaux, but he needs to fix his run defense. And I think maybe a new system that could be reinvigorating for him and maybe a little bit more refreshing for a player like Kayvon Thibodeaux. Maybe it will allow him to pin his ears back and not be dropping into coverage for an overload blitz to the other side, which is something that Wink Martindale did very often, especially when the opposing offenses were sliding their protection or keeping two guys on Kayvon Thibodeaux. That's one thing about Wink Martindale's defense that we have to discuss. Look, it doesn't maximize the statistics of some of their pass rushers. It never has. It's a collective unit. Like this year, they were number one in turnovers, right? Last year, they weren't. They had 6 total interceptions, which is pathetic. And they relied on a lot of timely forced fumbles to win football games. A lot of them were due to Xavier McKinney being very prompt with his Peanut Tillman punch. But now we're going to have another coordinator coming in, Dan, and you have to get a lot out of KT. Got to see if you're going to retain Xavier McKinney. Jason Pinnock, I think he could be maybe not a building block right now, but he could maybe become a building block. So they have some talent on the defensive side of the football. I would hate to see it wasted by an inept offense, kind of like what we saw this past season. And the defense wasn't faultless, but the offense was their biggest Achilles heel.
Without a doubt. The numbers all back that up as well, Nick. So it's not like you're just talking out of your ass there. I know a lot of people have their own opinions on what went down, but that's the truth of it. The offense is going to have to take the jump, and this defense has its pieces, but we're going to have to see if they can get maximized. It's an interesting window that the Giants are in, man, because I think going into 2022, they expected it to be like, all right, we'll see what happens here, but we're probably blowing this thing up and rebuilding it. Then they won so many games, and they won that one playoff game that it was like, all right, now we're going all in on this core. But it's like, how much, like, that's the thing. I think they're going to get one more chance this year. I do, because they played themselves out of drafting a quarterback, in my personal opinion. We'll see what happens there. They might trade up, and I could be proven wrong. But I think they most likely played themselves out of getting like a really elite quarterback talent, in which case, again, to me, if you're not getting one of the elite dudes, I'd rather you just use one of those 2 second-round picks, because I don't know that there's enough of a difference between like the Penixes of the world and whoever you can fit your system in the second round, depending on who, is like. Let's look at last year as an example. Like Will Levis, right? That's kind of like he lasts all the way to the beginning of round 2, where the Giants are going to be picking this year. I think that the NFL will probably, like, if they don't, there's only so many teams that are willing to use that first round pick on a quarterback that I don't know necessarily that you need to push up to and jump to. And that's the other thing with 6. It's like, if you take a quarterback you don't believe is an elite talent, Nick, for sure at 6, you're kind of just repeating what you did in 2019 over again. I don't know if you want to do that necessarily either. So it's a really interesting window that they're in.
No, I know. It's going to be fun to cover, though. I'm looking forward to it. I'm already getting really deep into the draft work and stuff with guys who are going to the Reese's Senior Bowl. So it's going to be a fun off season. I just hope the Giants nail it, man. I'm just so sick of mediocrity. It's just getting monotonous at this point.
It's getting so monotonous, and we need we all want this. We all want to just have a consistently winning football team. Everybody has their own opinions on how to get there. That's the fun of it. There's a lot of debate. Sometimes it gets toxic. Sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it's better, depending on who you're talking to. But the goal is to just get a consistent winner out there somehow, some way, so we don't have to keep cycling through seasons like this one. And I'm excited to see what they do because I think everything's on the table. That's the thing. Like last offseason, we knew it was more defined, right? We have this need at linebacker. We're going to fill it. We need to get corners for Wink's Martindale system. We use the first round capital there. We're moving forward with Jones. Let's build around him. We got Waller, all those things. This offseason is not as defined. There's a lot more flexibility to where they could go. And things could surprise us, Nick. I really do believe that. I think the Giants could trade up or trade back. I really think that both are in play in this draft at that 6th overall pick, depending on, where the rest of the offseason goes. But we'll have to see what happens there.
And also remember, Joe Schoen, I mean, he made a deal for Darren Waller by conversations he had with the Raiders general manager at the Senior Bowl and then at the Combine. So this is somebody who's going to be schmoozing up with other general managers and networking and trying to find the best way to improve this roster. He's not somebody who just kind of sits on his hands and doesn't make deals. He'll wheel and deal if he thinks it's going to be beneficial for the Giants.
Yeah, and I definitely like his process for wheeling and dealing as well. I think he's done a good job in that regard for sure. Like I know some people are skeptical of the Waller move. I still think it was a good move. I think he got a little unlucky with that injury before the Cowboys game. You could say it's not luck because he's been injured a lot in his career, Waller, but like I always just feel like injuries
it was a good move for the direction that they decided to take.
Yeah.
If they didn't decide to take that direction, maybe you could question the move. But since they decided to take that direction, then I think it was a good move.
And let's not overrate what the 100th overall pick is going to get you, because most of the time it's going to get you jack shit, to be completely honest with you. Sometimes it's going to get lucky, very rarely. Most of the time that's a throwout pick. And yeah, it's a younger player and you're hoping for the best, but you get past the top 60, 70 prospects in a class. And to me, it's a lot of dart throws at that point. So it is what it is on that front. But yeah, excited to see what happens this offseason, Nick. A lot to unfold. First, the coaches, though. That's what they'll probably fill out first. So we'll keep it locked and loaded here on Big Blue Banter. Thank you so much for tuning in. I know a lot of you have discussed you want to do a mailbag at some point. We'll probably do an offseason mailbag soon so we can get into a lot of these questions as well. But otherwise, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.